Dragons are fire made flesh, and fire is power. Quaithe to Daenerys Targaryen, A Clash of Kings, Chapter 27, Daenerys 2. By the time of the main A Song of Ice and Fire books, dragons have long been gone from Westeros and the known world since the death of the last dragon 150 years prior during the reign of King Aegon III in the wake of the Targaryen Civil War, the Dance of the Dragons, a war of succession that saw the death of most of the Targaryen dragons to a point they would never recover. Even before this point, dragons had become a rare thing. After the Doom of Valyria 102 years before Aegon's conquest, the only dragons left in the world were under the control of House Targaryen, the ghosts of Old Valyria, who had fled the Empire before the Doom. This put House Targaryen in a very powerful position, because, truth be told, nothing matches the power of a dragon. But herein lies the issue. To say House Targaryen controlled the last dragons in the world is not strictly true, because there was a handful of wild dragons who existed that were not under the direct control of House Targaryen. In this video, we will be taking a look at the known wild dragons of Westeros and delving into the possibility there were once other wild dragons around Westeros and the known world that we don't know about, and the possibility that they never truly went extinct after the dance. We should not pretend to any understanding of the bond between dragon and dragon rider. Wiser heads have pondered that mystery for centuries. We do know, however, that dragons are not horses, to be ridden by any man who throws a saddle on their back. The writings of Archmaester Gyldain, Fire and Blood, The Dying of the Dragons. Post Doom of Valyria, there are 3 known wild dragons, and a 4th that later became somewhat wild. All of them were active during the Dance of the Dragons, with each playing a very different role in the story. Strictly speaking, these dragons are the only ones we can 100% with certainty say were wild. The first of these was the Cannibal, a dragon black as coal with menacing green eyes. He was the largest and the oldest of the 3 completely wild dragons that dwelled on and around Dragonstone during the Dance of the Dragons. He got his name from the small folk of the island, who called him the Cannibal because he was often found feasting on dead dragons, newborn dragons, and even dragon eggs. The Cannibal's exact age is not clear, but he is very old. The other wild dragons we know of are said to have hatched when the old king was still young, which would likely place his birth early in the reign or even in the youth of King Jaehaerys I. My guess is likely somewhere around 50 AC onwards. There are some small folk of Dragonstone who claimed the Cannibal had lived on the island before the Targaryens even arrived in Westeros in 114 BC. If true, not only would this make him the oldest living dragon at the time of the dance, but likely the oldest dragon we know of. Others have speculated that the Cannibal might have come from an entirely different lineage of dragons, which could explain his hostility towards the Targaryen dragons, and also explain why he is wild rather than tamed. In either event, this would indicate there was a population of wild dragons living on Dragonstone prior to the Doom of Valyria. But Grandmaster Munkin and Septon Eustace, however, dismissed these tales as the gossip of small folk. The Cannibal was notorious for attacking and devouring smaller dragons, which is why he made his lair on the eastern side of the Dragon Mount, where the bones of many would-be dragon riders littered the ground. By 129 AC, when Prince Jaehaerys Velaryon called for dragon seeds to claim the riderless dragons, none of them dared approach the Cannibal. In 130 AC, the shattered, half-burned carcass of the dragon Grey Ghost was found at the foot of the Dragon Mount, and the Cannibal was initially given the blame. In 132 AC, some claimed that during the burial at sea of Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Cannibal flew overhead in salute, and then the dragon was never seen again. As sometime after the Dance of the Dragons, he disappeared, and his fate remains a mystery. Grey Ghost was another wild dragon living on Dragonstone during the Dance of the Dragons. He was said to be pale grey-white, the colour of morning mist, and was a notably shy dragon who avoided men. His avoidance of people and his ability to hide in the clouds and mist gave him his name. Oddly, unlike his kin, Grey Ghost preferred to feed on fish, and was often glimpsed flying over the narrow sea, snatching prey from the waters. He made his lair in the smoking vents high on the eastern side of the Dragon Mount. He was never claimed nor ridden by any rider. During the Dance of the Dragons, Prince Jaehaerys Velaryon sought new dragon riders to fight the Greens. Some of these dragon seeds looked for Grey Ghost, but could not find him, as he was an elusive creature. Alan of Hull first sought out Grey Ghost, before attempting and failing to claim Sheepstealer. In 130 AC, a crew of a small merchant cog out of Pentos saw Grey Ghost and another dragon fighting in the skies above the Dragon Mount when passing the island. Grey Ghost was slain in the struggle. When Sir Robert Quince, the Castellan of Dragonstone, heard of Grey Ghost's death, he wrongly assumed this was the work of the Cannibal. A skinny brown girl on a skinny brown dragon. The writings of Maester Munkin. Fire and Blood. The Dying of the Dragons. The last of the known wild dragons of Dragonstone was Sheepstealer, who had a taste for mutton, hence his name. He lived at the back of the Dragon Mount and would often hunt between Driftmark and the Wendwater. Sheepstealer was noted for his unattractive mud-brown colouring. His flames were said to either burn red or gold depending on the tale. Though not naturally aggressive towards humans, he was temperamental and could turn vicious if provoked. True to his name, Sheepstealer favoured mutton over other meats, often raiding flocks across Dragonstone. We suspect that Sheepstealer was already over the age of 50 at the start of the Dance of the Dragons, but was more likely nearer the age of 70, but we cannot say for certain. Despite his age, he may be both larger and slender as other Targaryen dragons. Sheepstealer went unclaimed throughout his youth. Each passing decade, he grew more weary of humans, making him even more increasingly difficult to tame. At the start of the Dance of the Dragons, Prince Jaehaerys Velaryon had issued a call for dragon seeds to attempt to claim riderless dragons. This effort would become known as the sowing of the dragon seeds. It saw Sheepstealer among 4 other dragons approached, along with Vermithor, Seasmoke and Silverwing, who had already had riders and were thus under the control of House Targaryen. This made Sheepstealer the most dangerous of the 4 to claim. In fact, he killed more candidates than the other 3 combined. Silver Dennis, who claimed descent from King Maegor Targaryen, lost an arm when Sheepstealer attacked him, while Alan of Hull was badly burned during his own attempt. Ultimately, a bastard girl named Nettle succeeded where others failed. Using practice and cunning, she left freshly killed sheep for Sheepstealer each morning until the dragon grew accustomed to her presence. Over time, this bond allowed her to mount him. Together, Nettles and Sheepstealer joined Rhaenyra's cause, fighting in the Battle of the Gullet and helping secure the swift capture of King's Landing. Afterwards, Sheepstealer would be housed in the Dragon Pit. Nettles and Sheepstealer would then join Prince Daemon Targaryen and his dragon Caraxes in the hunt for Aemon Targaryen and his dragon Vhagar, who was bringing a reign of terror along the Trident. They based themselves at Maidenpool, setting out every morning to continue their hunt. When Queen Rhaenyra later declared Nettles a traitor, the girl departed Maidenpool at dawn after feeding Sheepstealer, the largest black ram in the castle's pens. She and her dragon were last seen flying east over the Bay of Crabs. Towards the end of the dance, rumours began to spread of sightings of Sheepstealer at Cracklaw Point and in the Mountains of the Moon. By 134 AC, during the early reign of King Aegon III, a Sir Robert Rowan led royalist host into the Vale to aid Sir Joffrey Arryn in putting down an uprising. There his men discovered Sheepstealer and the ragged-looking Nettles sheltering in a cave. The ensuing fight was brutal. 16 men were slain and 60 more wounded before Nettles escaped with Sheepstealer, flying deeper into the Mountains of the Moon. In time, an offshoot clan of the Painted Dogs began to worship a figure they called a Fire Witch. They sent their boys to her with offerings, after which the youths were made to face her dragon's flames as a test of courage. This clan earned a reputation as one of the most savage among the mountain tribes, and tales of the Fire Witch endure even centuries later. Some Maesters believe this custom gave rise to the tradition of the Burnt Men, who still demand their initiates sacrifice a part of their body to the fire to prove their manhood. Silverwing had carried her to Old Town, to the Wall, and to 1,000 places in between, and Alysanne saw them all as few others ever would, looking down above the clouds. The words of Archmaester Galdane, Fire and Blood, The Long Reign, Jaehaerys and Alysanne. Now, the fourth and final named wild dragon I want to talk about is tricky, because technically she was, for most of her life, a tamed dragon who had multiple riders, but arguably became a wild dragon. Silverwing was a silver she-dragon, ridden by Queen Alysanne Targaryen and later by Ulf White during the Dance of the Dragons. Her flames were blue, and she was considered relatively docile and friendly to strangers in comparison to most other dragons. She would often be coiled with Vermithor, her mate, the dragon of King Jaehaerys, Alysanne's brother and husband. Thus, this had led to some speculation. Several of the dragons active during the reign of King Jaehaerys and into the reign of Viserys might have come from the pair. According to legend, Silverwing hatched from a dragon's egg that had been placed in the cradle of Alysanne by her sister Rhaena in 36 AC, a tradition that Alysanne would also carry on with her own children. Alysanne and Silverwing had a very close bond, and the pair travelled near on the whole of Westeros over the years on several royal progresses, including the likes of the far north and the Wall, which Silverwing had refused to fly over. After Alysanne died in 100 AC, Silverwing would remain riderless and would nest on Dragonstone alongside Vermithor after Jaehaerys' own death 2 years later. She would eventually be claimed by the dragon seed Ulf White during the Dance of the Dragons, and take part in the Battle of the Gullet and the First Battle of Tumbleton. After the betrayal of Ulf White and New Hammer at the first battle, they were now technically part of the Green faction and the Hightower army. During the Second Battle of Tumbleton, an army of 4,000 men led by Sir Adam Velaryon upon the dragon Seasmoke surprised the Hightowers at Tumbleton with their nighttime attack. Ulf White would sleep through the battle, but even without a rider, Silverwing took to the sky during the battle. At one point, a crossbowman shot a bolt at her. Silverwing avoided further battle, and instead just circled the battlefield for hours, aimlessly. She descended only again the next day, after the sun had gone down, and landed between the slain Vermithor, Seasmoke, and Tessarion. The singers claim that Silverwing attempted to lift Vermithor's wing on 3 occasions, but Archmaester Galdane considers this most likely to have been a fable. When the sun rose again, Silverwing began to fly listlessly across the fields, where she fed on the burned carcasses of men and animals. Silverwing's rider Ulf White insisted he should now become the new king of the Seven Kingdoms, as King Aegon II was missing, and Prince Aemon and Daeron died. Hobbit Hightower, one of the bloody caltrops, gave off poison wine. Silverwing became riderless again. Lord Unwin Peake had offered 1,000 golden dragons to any knight of noble birth who was able to claim the dragon. Out of the 3 men who came forth, the first had his arm torn off and the second burnt to death. The third man then changed his mind. Silverwing was one of only 4 dragons still alive at the end of the Dance of the Dragons, and although accustomed to men, she became wild during the reign of King Aegon III, and made her lair on a small island in Red Lake in the northwest of the Reach. She continued living in Red Lake during the regency of King Aegon III. Currently, we have no idea of her fate, but it is speculated she lived out her life as a wild dragon in the Reach. There is not currently evidence that suggests how long this was for. At its apex, Valyria was the greatest city in the known world, the centre of civilization, with its shining walls, 200 rival houses vied for power and glory in court and in council, rising and falling in endless, subtle, often savage struggle for dominance. The writings of Maester Yandel, the world of ice and fire, the reign of the dragons. There is some evidence to suggest the possibility of other wild dragons, but the issue is it's hard to separate legend from reality. What makes this even harder is we have no consensus on the origin of dragons, with the origins really changing the possibility of dragons once being a wide-ranging creature across the known world. In Septon Barth's An Unnatural History, he considers several legends regarding the origin of dragons. The Valyrians claim that dragons sprang forth from the 14 Flames, a ring of volcanoes on the Valyrian Peninsula. Dragons are also said to have originated from the Shadowlands beyond Asshai by the Shadow, and the islands of the Jade Sea. Ancient tales from Asshai claim that an unnamed people first tamed these dragons, brought them to Valyria, and taught the Valyrians their arts before disappearing from the annals of history. In Karth, tales state that dragons came from a second moon in the sky, which was scalded by the sun and cracked like an egg, with 1,000,000 dragons pouring forth. However, this origin tale seems much more like a myth than the others. All three of these versions of the tale suggest dragons were a naturally occurring thing, but there's also a lot of strong evidence that suggests dragons could in fact not be natural at all. Valyrians were known to create monstrous hybrid creatures using blood mages, creatures that have no business being combined. There is some evidence to suggest dragons were created by Valyrian blood mages using wyverns, flying reptiles that do not breathe flame, native to Sotholios, and firewyrms, which are wingless reptilian creatures that do breathe fire, that lived in the 14 flames of Valyria. But some have also argued that dragons could just be a related species to wyverns and firewyrms, rather than hybrid creatures created with blood magic. But if dragons were in fact created by Valyrians and not natural creatures, that would drastically lower the possibility of widespread dragons. The case for natural wild dragons could be supported by the fact there are countless legends of wild dragons from across the known world that predate the rise of Valyria. The ice pressed cold around them, and he could feel the cold seeping into his bones. The weight of the wall above his head, it felt like walking down the gullet of an ice dragon. The thoughts of Jon Snow, A Storm of Swords, chapter 64, Jon 8. Dating back to the age of heroes in Westeros, well before the rise of Valyria, we have three cases of knights slaying dragons. Sir Galadon of Morn is said to have slain a dragon with the just maid, and a man known as Crackbones allegedly twisted a dragon's neck into a knot. Serwyn of the Mirror Shield is also said to have slew the dragon Arax using a mirrored shield, and the famed hero Davos the Dragon Slayer, beloved in the Reach, is said to also have slain a dragon, hence his name. Speaking of the Reach, there are also tales that suggest that dragons once roosted on Battle Isle, the future site of the Hightower in Old Town, back when Old Town was nothing more than a small trading post, and that the first men of House Hightower slayed these dragons. Even as far as the cold north, the small folk of Winterfell and its winter town have been known to claim that the hot springs inside Winterfell are heated by the breath of a dragon that sleeps beneath the castle. There is even a possibility of other types of dragons that do not breathe fire. Other species, if you like. In the Eyed Islands, we have the legend of Naga, a sea dragon, the first and mightiest sea dragon, a creature which fed on krakens and leviathans that was slain by the legendary Grey King, with her bones forming part of the Grey King's Hall. The petrified bones of some kind of gigantic sea creature do indeed stand on Naga's Hill on Old Wick, but whether they are actually the bones of a sea dragon remain open to dispute. The ribs are huge, but nowhere near as large enough to have belonged to a dragon capable of feasting on a giant kraken. In truth, the very existence of sea dragons has been called into question by some. If such monsters did or do exist, maesters believe they must dwell in the deepest, darkest reaches of the Sunset Sea, as none has ever been seen in the known world for thousands of years. There is a little bit of supporting evidence of sea dragons. In the north, we have a very small fortified peninsula called Sea Dragon Point, but it's not clear if this really has any connection with the idea of true sea dragons. We then have the tales of the ice dragons. Ice dragons are said to roam the shivering sea and the white wastes. Reportedly, they are far larger than dragons of Valyria and are made of living ice, with eyes of pale blue crystal, vast translucent wings. Whereas common dragons breathe fire, ice dragons supposedly breathe cold, a chill so terrible that it can freeze a man solid in half a heartbeat. Old Nan told tales of ice dragons to the children of Eddard Stark. She said that the breath of an ice dragon was very cold. Sailors from 100 nations have said to have glimpsed these great beasts over the centuries. So maybe perhaps there is some truth behind these tales. Archmaester Marget has suggested that many legends of the North, the freezing mists, ice ships, and Cannibal Bay, and the like, could be explained by distorted reports of ice dragon activity. As ice dragons supposedly melt when slain, no actual proof of their existence has ever been found. Outside of Westeros, dragons, demons, and other creatures are also said to inhabit cliffs above the Ash River, north of Asshai. And there are some legends that state that dragons still may live in the unknown Shadowlands east of Asshai. So the idea of there being widespread dragons in Westeros and beyond really does depend on what version of dragon origins you believe. Given that many of these tales and legends predate the rise of Valyria, would indeed suggest that dragons existed well before the rise of the Empire. But if they were indeed hybrid creatures created by Valyrians, then natural wild dragons do seem much less likely. My personal theory is along the lines that like we have differing animals in the real world that look and act similar, but are in fact two very distinct different animals with different evolutionary backgrounds. The same might apply for dragons. Kind of like how crocodiles and alligators are evolutionary cousins. It may be we have naturally occurring dragons, which explain the ancient tales and legends, with the Valyrians selectively breeding or using blood magic to create these wyvern fireworm hybrids, forming a sort of Valyrian subspecies of dragon. I doubt we'll ever really get answers on this, but I think the best way to end this video is to take a look at the words of George R.R. Martin himself on the subject, because at the end of the day he is the authority on this. In December 1999, a fan asked George the following question on Westeros.org. In the Hedge Knight, ancient dragons are mentioned, thousands of years old. Were there dragons in Westeros before the Targaryens brought them? Or did the Targaryens bring the skeletons of old dragons with them? The follow-up question, which I realise may be something you keep for the books, is what happens to the dragons out of Westeros? If I understood correctly, the alchemists say there were no more dragons anywhere. Was that so? George's response was the following. The dragons were all over, once. There are no more dragons known to exist. But this is a medieval period, and large parts of the world are still terra incognita, so there are always tales of dragon sightings in far-off mysterious places. The Maesters tend to discount those, regardless of what the true origins of dragons may be, and how much of the myths and legends are true. It seems in George R.R. Martin's mind, wild dragons did exist all over the known world. But given this was his view 25 years ago, who knows how much of that view might have changed? Because most of the lore, especially around the origins of dragons, seems to be quite recent, coming mostly from the world of Ice and Fire, which came out in 2016. But who knows how long he's been cooking these ideas behind the lore.